I want to find a scientific or technological idea that is central to the Apollo 1 fire. Here's the crazy thing, Dan. Maybe there's kind of a version of the Apollo 1 story that connects to that history of oxygen that I've already written about.
Now we're getting exciting because we can take this and go back to your Readwise notes and try to pull some sources, right?
Oh, that's really cool. It brought up Picard. This source provides an example of an early enclosed environment that relied on a pure oxygen supply, similar to the Apollo 1 spacecraft.
That's so cool. That's the opening. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Dan. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. You're such a great writer. I love your writing. And you're also kind of in this like interesting intersection where you're doing incredible writing and you're also working at Google. So for people who don't know, I feel like I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but for people who don't know, you are the best-selling author of How We Got to Now and Where Good Ideas Come From and a bunch of other books, I think 13 other books. You just wrote a new book, which I have right here called The Infernal Machine. And if that wasn't enough, you are also the editorial director of NotebookLM and GoogleLab, which is NotebookLM is Google's AI research product. And I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, this is really great. We actually have some kind of news to break as well. So it's going to be really fun.
Yeah. So by the time this podcast comes out, a new version of NotebookLM will be out. And we will be on the show today. We will be demoing all those new features. We'll talk about how you used it to write your last book and then talk about how we can use the new features to maybe write a new book or find a new book concept for you. So I'm curious, before we get started, talk to us a little bit about what NotebookLM is.
Yeah, it's a tool that we've been developing for about the last 2 years at GoogleLab, which is this wonderful new division inside of Google, that is really designed to build a kind of your ideal research and writing software, knowing that you have from the very beginning a language model at the core of the product, right? So like we really began this, in the age of large language models, knowing that there was going to be a possibility to build like entirely new kinds of software. It wasn't just about like adding some AI to, a word processor or adding some AI to a photo editor. This is about like, what can you build that's like a genuinely new kind of surface to work with? And this had been we can talk about it a little bit, but like the obsession in my life with using software to help me with organizing my ideas, organizing things that I read and turning those ultimately into books or into TV shows or whatever. It's just been an obsession of mine for like 30 years or longer, even really. And so Google has got very interested in this process of co-creating with people. So not just kind of sitting around and building products and then handing them over to writers or musicians, but actually having a writer or musician in the room from the beginning with the project. It's a big part of the lab's ethos in particular. And so they called me up one day, 2 years ago. They were like, "Hey, would you be interested in maybe helping us build this thing you've always wanted?" And that was an easy yes. And so, yeah, we kind of built a very early prototype. And I think because the technology was suddenly, available with language models. And because I've been sitting on these ideas for so long, we were able to build, a pretty quick prototype, and that got a bunch of interest internally. And we launched NotebookLM in the US in December of last year. And today we are announcing that we are rolling out to over 200 countries around the world. So we're really excited about that.
That's amazing. And I just want to go back, like the thing that like really sparked my attention at the beginning of this is like sort of this obsession with organizing your ideas and using those to produce work. Cause like I feel that same thing. I'm a nerd for that stuff. And I just want to understand, like, tell us about some of those, what that obsession is, or what some of those ideas are. Like, what are those things that you've always wanted that are kind of starting to come through here?
Yeah, I mean, it actually dates back. I'm going to really date myself here, which is that one of the things that changed my life, truly changed my life, was when I was a sophomore in college in the fall of 1987, Apple released something called HyperCard, which was this like crazy app. I always say it was a little bit like the Velvet Underground of software. Like it never really had a hit, but it like influenced all these other people. And it was basically a kind of prototype, almost web-like hypertext kind of system where you could organize information pretty much any way you wanted and kind of make links between it. And I just got obsessed with the idea that I could use this tool as a place to kind of keep all my notes from my classes. And I kind of built this little application that I called Curriculum that was kind of a way of like taking notes for classes. And I spent way more time like building the tool than actually like using it to take notes for classes. But I kind of stopped going to the classes for a while because I just wanted to build the tool, but it was one of those things. But it just gave me like a taste. It wasn't ready, in any way for kind of prime time use, but I got a sense of the possibility. And then obviously when the web came along, I kind of jumped on that maybe a little bit earlier than some people because I lived briefly in the world of HyperCard and early hypertext. And then about 20 years ago, there's a program that I wrote about a lot, actually, a wonderful program, way ahead of its time, called DevonThink. And it's still around, actually. It's a really cool application. And it enabled me to keep all these quotes from books that I'd read. I would originally kind of type them in, and then when the Kindle came out, I could, get the quotes digitally. And you could kind of make connections between quotes, or you could type something and say, what quotes in my research library are related to this? It had this kind of associative, early kind of semantic search. And I used that quite a bit on a lot of my books, like the Ghost Map used that. And I would have these moments where the software would recommend a quote that I had forgotten from an earlier book, and it would make a new connection in my mind that I hadn't thought of before. And I thought, this almost feels like a partnership with the software. Like I'm curating these quotes, so it's me, and I know how to turn them into a chapter or a paragraph in a book. That's my intelligence, but the connection was really made by the software. That seems kind of new and tantalizing and weird, but also maybe very powerful. And so that was another taste that kind of got me along that way. And then, when I first started experiencing what was possible with language models, starting with GPT-3, before I came to Google, I thought, oh wait, now it's all really going to be possible. Like all this stuff it's going to get very serious and very real. So that's the prehistory.
And I'm curious, like why do you think that's every nerd's dream, is to have this sort of interconnected note system that you can use to make stuff? Why is that so appealing?
Yeah. Well, and they're different, they're different. This is true on so many levels, but they're different kinds of nerds.
That's true.
The thing I've always felt like, and this is true the way I organize my email as well, which is to say I spend zero time organizing my email. My principle has always been create one place where you dump everything and then use, smart tools like search and now all these language models, to find what you need. Don't spend any time organizing anything. Just throw it all in one place and focus on having the ideas and stuff like that. And so, and I think Notebook, probably to a fault, NotebookLM has been kind of designed a little bit with that principle. You can't tag your notes, for instance. And, we probably should have. People do like to tag things. And I just am always I'm not going to spend a second tagging anything because I want the software to understand what categories. I don't want to put things too in advance into buckets, because I want it to be an open-ended connective system where I can make new associations or create new kind of clusters on the fly. And if I spend all this time tagging, I'm going to limit the connections that I can do. So I'm on the side of, emergent chaos, right? Don't organize it and just let things bubble up and figure out tools that will let that bubbling up happen. But then there's a whole other set of folks who really like to organize it and systematize it and have it all in these categories and things like that. And so hopefully we can ultimately make NotebookLM play well with both those groups. I think it's certainly within our power.
Yeah, it's the top down versus bottom up, folks.
Yeah.
I'm definitely in the bottom up camp with you, so I'm excited to see Notebook. Let's roll into that. So like, give us a little bit of a tour of Notebook. Tell us about, because we're going to talk about how you used it for your latest book. So tell us a little bit about how Notebook works, and then how you use it for the book that you wrote.
Yeah, I'll just give you the kind of basics. The idea is everything inside of NotebookLM is grounded in the documents you provide. So we may open this up a little bit over time. I think it's probably a logical thing to do, but unless you provide Notebook with what we call sources, kind of underlying the documents that are the source of truth for your project, the things that you're working on, and it could be everything from your journals to work documents, or to research materials or quotes from books that you've read. You begin each project by opening up a notebook and uploading sources. And at that point, once they're uploaded, the model, in a sense, kind of becomes an expert in the information you've shared. Now, this has become increasingly common. It was kind of a radical idea when we were first toying around with it 2 years ago. But the idea of having documents, attached to a model like Gemini or ChatGPT has become increasingly common. But our use is like, you're always working with documents, and the whole interface is designed to like let you basically load a lot of different documents, move back and forth between those documents, or potentially read those documents while you're working, and not get into that kind of flow that so many people I think are finding these days, where they have like 12 tabs open, and they're like grabbing some text from one tab and then pasting it into the chatbot and another thing, and then they're getting the output and they're saving it in another document. Like, we want to have a single integrated surface where you can do all that work. So in a sense, designed to not interrupt your flow state. Like, if you're thinking or writing or reading, you should just have one place where you can do that and not be like, wait, what was the tab that I had open where I had that quote that I wanted to use and that other thing? So that's the kind of the underlying model. And if those of you are watching this, I have open here a notebook that this is kind of cool. This is my crazy notebook. This is where I have all of the quotes that I have collected over the years for books dating back to something like 1999. I think it goes back to this far.
Wow.
So it's about 7,000 quotes.
Oh my God.
That I've collected. So it's really like my reading history, like the things that were important to my books in the past. And so they're lined up here as a bunch of different sources. This is kind of left over from the fact that we used to have a kind of a cap on how long the sources could be. So now you can have this is just changed a couple of weeks ago. In each notebook, you can have up to 50 sources, and each source can be up to 500,000 words. So you can effectively be talking with 25 million words in a single notebook, which is just kind of mind blowing. So these quotes are like, they are, here, I'll just open up one of them. They are, I think there's something like 2 million words total, 2 million words, 7,000 quotes, 2 million words, something like that. And
this is crazy. So these are all of the quotes from all of the books that you've read since 1999.
Well, yeah. I mean, not all of the books, but yes, a significant amount. And so
this is very valuable. Like, can you just like send me a Stripe link? Like, how much do you want? Do you want for this?
Yeah. And by the way, I should point out one thing that's really important here. So these are quotes. So these are all books that I've purchased, right? And these are quotes that I've clipped increasingly using the Kindle, using the kind of like limits that are built into Kindles and the amount that you can quote and use. And it's really important to stress this, and this is important for me as an author. We're not training the model on this information. So this information, we're just loading the information from these quotes into the context window of the model, the kind of short-term memory of the model. And we're using that to answer questions or be intelligent about it. So there's no chance that this information, which is under copyright, is going to be used to train the model or be shown to anybody else. And so you have this freedom to work with material. If you have the right to use it under copyright, you can use it inside of NotebookLM. We spent a lot of time ensuring that works. So yeah, so this is this incredible. This is just one of these I'm just scrolling through this for those of you who are listening. It's just like an endless list of quotes, and I'm just scratching the surface. And each source that we put in, we create a source guide that summarizes the source. Now, this is normally extremely useful because generally a source is on a single topic and you can get a kind of high level thing. It's crazy when you give it like whatever, this is probably like 800 quotes in this one source on all these different topics. And so it has to, it creates a summary like this source explores the intersection of scientific advancement, societal impact, and ethical considerations, and how, it's doing a very good job of trying to make some kind of pattern out of all this. But source guides for just quotes are not quite as useful. So now at this point, basically, I can ask any question. And so I preloaded a question here. I'm going to close this source. I preloaded a question if we view the chat.
And the question will be asked of all of these sources together.
Yes, I can. You'll note that they're checked off here. So you can always tell, this is a really subtle thing, but it's really important about it. It'll say down at the bottom at the chat box, it'll say 15 sources. So that means you are currently talking to all 15 of your sources here. If I actually deselect this one for some reason, now I'm talking to 14 sources. And so you sometimes have moments where you're like, actually, the information I want is only in this one document. I don't want to ignore all the other information. So you can actually shift. It's like you're able to shift the focus of the model to various different things really, really easily. So I asked this question, what are the most interesting facts about ant colonies here? Mention authors and specific books, because I actually wrote a book a million years ago called Emergence. We talked about, the emergent approach to these things. And there was a big riff about ant colonies in that book. And the model is smart enough to understand this concept of like interestingness too, and surprise. Like I often say, like, what's the most surprising idea here? Because you think about that as an author, and the idea that can be like effectively a search query is just totally bonkers. So I'll just read this for people who are listening. So it comes back with interesting facts about ant colonies. Ants use pheromones to communicate in various messages, such as danger, food location, and nestmate recognition. This complex chemical communication system allows ant colonies to function as a single unit or superorganism. Yes, fantastic. That is a great answer. And now this is new, by the way. So this is a brand new feature rolling out today. We're incredibly excited about it. We now have these inline citations. And so that shows you exactly the quote from my reading notes that it used to generate this answer. And so you can just roll over them and you can see where the model came up with this. This one is from Norbert Wiener. That's pretty interesting. And you can see their citations all over the place. And what's even cooler is you can, although a little bit in a way less useful for this project, we'll show it in another thing, but I can always click on those and it takes me exactly to the point in my documents where the original quote came from. So you have this ability to kind of ask the model to help you get the lay of the land, like what's in here, I'm interested in this topic, what's there. And then because the sources are integrated into your notebook itself, you can then dive right in and start reading. And so you can go through all these things and basically, and we also suggest questions based on what you just asked. So there's always something to just click on.
Can I ask a question?
Sources? Yes, go right ahead.
And you tell me like whether or not this is a good question to ask it. But one of the things I'm interested, just like looking at this and knowing how many things are in here that you've like kind of collected over the years is like, what are the types of things that Steven Johnson is likely to save? Like, what are the patterns in texts or books that are likely to make you want to put them in there? Do you think it would be good at that?
Would Notebook be good at finding those things? Yeah, it's a great question. So there are two different versions of why I save things. The first is pretty easy, and yes, to this particular use case, Notebook will be great at this. Which is I have a very specific project in mind, and I'm in the middle of a book, and I'm writing, in Infernal Machine, the new book. There are a bunch of themes. You've read some of it, I think. It has the history of anarchism, the history of forensic science, the history of the birth of the FBI, the kind of thread, the invention of dynamite, all kind of woven together in this single plot. So when I'm in research mode for that, it's like, I could very easily tell NotebookLM, these are the key themes of the book. Help me find passages that are relevant to those themes. And a little later in this conversation, I'll show you that in practice. That's very easy to do, and it's just incredibly good at that. The trickier question is, like, I often save things without knowing where they're going to go. There's not a specific project that they're attached to. There are often things that I often save things that I don't understand. Like, when I read something I understand, I'm like, well, I already know this on some level, so I don't need to save it. Whereas when I read something and I'm like, that's provocative, but I don't really get it, I often try and save that. Or you get a little glimmer. I've written enough books by this point and worked on enough projects that you get a little glimmer of, like, that could be something. And so you save those things, even though they don't have a slot to go in, or don't have a chapter to go in, or even a book to go in yet. And that's the question, like, over time, will software like NotebookLM get to know my general sensibility enough to be able to detect those things? I would have said, 2 years ago, absolutely not. And now I think it probably will be able to do that. And then you start really getting into the agent mode where you're like, please go scour the internet for things that could be useful for me. And clearly that's in our future, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking is, like, do you think we could ask NotebookLM what your sensibility is based on these sources, and then have it return something that might tell us about something about the way your brain works that might be surprising and interesting?
I don't know. Yeah, let's try. I'm Stephen Johnson, the author who
Maybe we shouldn't say who you are, just so that it doesn't
Sure.
Have that to go
off
of.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, because it's clearly, I'm so well represented in the training data. I'm sure it knows exactly.
13 books will do that.
Okay, so these sources are my reading notes from books I've read over the last 20 years. Please describe, what would you say, my interests and sensibility and general sensibility?
And sensibility. What do I care about most?
These quotes. Yeah. Oh, actually, sorry. Based on these quotes, what do I care about most?
And what can you tell about me?
And what can you tell? It's going to get very intimate, Dan.
I know. I'm excited for this. We're going right for it.
Yeah, this is so much of what our existence is like now with these models. Talk about emergence, where you're just like, what will it do in this situation? Like, no one ever sat down with Microsoft Word and was like, what will it do if I...
That's the whole premise of the show.
Okay. So this is interesting. It does a little hemming and hawing. So it says, it is difficult to draw concrete conclusions about your interests and sensibility solely from the provided source material. However, the content suggests an interest in a diverse range of topics, including literature. You included reading notes from novels like authors, just like Jonathan Franzen, history and politics, philosophy and economics, lots of citations, psychology and cognitive science. Yeah, it's right, but it's not going to win any profile.
It doesn't want to go too far.
Yeah,
I wonder if if we did the same prompt, but like tell it not to hem and haw, and assume that if I saved it, it's because it's interesting to me. Give it a little extra juice.
I wonder if it does have some memory. I'm just like, can you please try to speculate on my personality based on my decisions to clip these quotes? I know you don't want to, but I'm asking you nicely.
I would also say, okay.
Sorry.
It's so funny to just learn how to cajole these things. So
I don't,
do what you want them to do.
But the truth is, this is harder to do with NotebookLM because, for instance, if you try and ask Notebook about something that is not in these sources, it will decline to answer. And so, so it's just, it's not going to do it. It's funny. We definitely we have tried to build this model, and I think eventually we're going to have an approach where there's like a slider of sorts where you can choose different levels of openness and closeness. But we really started with the idea, let's build a model that is fully grounded, and then we'll really just stick to the facts. And so what it's straining against here is that the sources don't have any psychological explanation of who Steven Johnson is, And that's a tension. I sometimes definitely use it, and I'm like, no, okay, I would like you to be a little bit more open-ended. But I think in the research mode, we're erring on the side of groundedness more than we are on the open-ended side.
I have another one, and you tell me whether you think it'll be good for this, because it's less about you and just more about the sources. And that's what are the two sources that I've saved that most disagree with each other? And what do they disagree about?
Okay, that'll be interesting because it's so... there's so many, right? So can it, but let's try. I mean, it'd be interesting. Of all these quotes, what are the two, let's say authors who most disagree with each other, whose positions are the most opposed? This is kind of weird grammar, but
I'll figure it out.
It'll probably understand. It's just it's so much, Dan. I'd be surprised. I'd be interested to see what it says, but it may have an odd hey, dude, there's 7,000 quotes here. I can't possibly. Okay, here we go. That's interesting. Well, it's something from it's from the recent stuff from Infernal Machine. So these are my notes. This is Johann Most and Emma Goldman disagreeing about the use of violence. This is interesting because they didn't disagree at the beginning, but Goldman it gets in this kind of major fight with him. So it's not she ends up, okay, here's an argument for why this is a good answer. They had a philosophical disagreement about the use of violence in politics that got so intense that Most got up in New York City and gave a speech, and Goldman jumped on stage and attacked him with a horsewhip. So actually, this is actually a pretty astonishing answer because it really found. I mean, this is arguably the only place in the notes where two figures who were mentioned in the quotes physically attacked one another. So okay, well done.
Great. I have one more follow up, and then I'd love to move on. But so the follow up is something like. Of the other sources in this corpus, who is the author or what is the set of ideas that these two should have come in contact with that would have helped to mediate their dispute?
Okay. It'd be interesting to see. It's I'm just going to make sure it keeps the dispute in its mind. So in the dispute between Goldman and Most over violence, which other author in these quotes would have been most helpful in kind of resolving their dispute?
Yeah, resolving and mediating their dispute. Yeah.
Resolving and mediating their dispute.
And why?
You're pushing the boundaries of this. I love it. And we shall see. Yeah. That's what I would have said. That's so funny. So
who is Peter Kropotkin?
Very good. Peter Kropotkin is the anarchist philosopher who Goldman was heavily inspired by, who had a kind of middle ground position on the use of violence, and was it was that is exactly the right answer as well. Okay, good, well done, Notebook.
I love it. This is very cool. I would love to get into. I know we have another segment, which is what I really love doing as part of these shows is to go on a little exploration together and use these tools to do something new that neither of us kind of know where it's going. And so I think what you have prepared is another instance of notebook with a bunch of preloaded information, documents that we've never really gone through. And we're going to use that information to help us find what could be a new concept for maybe a book or a documentary. Can you sort of set the scene for us here? What are we looking at?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a new notebook that I've created. One of the things that NotebookLM is incredibly good with is, which is useful across a lot of different domains, is interview transcripts. So, so many workflows involve people, like if you're a reporter, or if you're a documentary filmmaker, or if you're a user researcher, or market researcher, you do all these interviews and you're trying to discern what the patterns are, figure out what the lessons are, and you dump a huge number of words of interviews. It's very disorganized, and NotebookLM is just amazing at going through those interviews and finding the relevant quotes and things like that. So this is an example where the scenario is, I have been thinking about this legitimately, which is there's a great oral history project that NASA created on the history of the Apollo missions and others. There are like thousands of interviews. And I've gone in, I've taken about 7 of them from people like John Glenn and Gene Kranz and some famous people. And I think it's about 200,000 words worth of transcripts that are in this particular notebook. And I'll show you one other thing. This is also new as of today. We're very excited about it. Up until recently, we've supported Google Docs, PDFs, text files, and so on. And now we have Google Slides for the first time, and we have true image understanding built into Notebook as well. So you can have slides in there as well, and in a sense, kind of talk to your images and do queries, and it will understand the images. So it's amazing. It will do handwriting analysis and things like that. It's pretty powerful. So we're really excited about that. That's very cool. That's a brand new feature as well. So in this, what I was thinking we could walk through is this idea of I'm thinking about the project that might involve the history of the tragic Apollo 1 fire that killed 3 astronauts in 1967. And thinking about that maybe is could you make a documentary about that? What would that look like? And the kind of the question is I've dumped a bunch of sources here. What do I have that I could use to kind of build the beginnings of a script maybe for a documentary? And I want to show you one other new thing that is related to this. And in a sense, this process of I have a lot of information and I need to get my bearings, just what are in these sources? This is not a situation like my reading notes where I've already read it. It's somebody gives you a bunch of files, you're trying to make sense of it, or you've downloaded all this stuff. You don't know, you haven't listened to the interviews yet. And so we've added this. This is a really cool thing. We previewed this at I/O in Sundar's keynote a couple of weeks ago. It's this new feature called Notebook Guide. And Notebook Guide basically gives you a summary across all your sources in the notebook, gives you some suggested questions that are kind of higher level. How do I really understand everything here? But we also have these templates that are kind of pre-created: FAQ, study guide, table of contents, timeline, and briefing doc. And so those are ways to get kind of the big picture view of what's in the documents. And they take a little bit of time to generate, so I preloaded a couple of them. So they're back here. By the way, I forgot to mention this before. You can save anything as a note in this kind of noteboard area. So you have this area can be filled with notes. You can write your own notes. If the model says something interesting, you can pin it to this noteboard area. So you're able to kind of capture this stuff as you're having conversations, as you're reading. You can capture everything to this noteboard. And I'll show you a little bit more about that as we go on. But here's the FAQ it generated based on these sources. So it went through 200,000 words worth of material and decided, figured out, okay, here's some good questions. What motivated individuals to join NASA? What kind of rigorous training and selection processes did aspiring astronauts endure? How did NASA manage the immense technical challenges and risks? And their answers for all of these. And the other thing that I love to do, because this is something as a writer you're constantly dealing with, is it'll create timelines, which is just incredibly useful. Creating a timeline is the most laborious thing, but it's really something you need if you're writing a book. You need to know what is the sequence, and it just will go through all these disparate transcripts and pull out. This is not based on its training data. This is based on like the information that's in all these transcripts. And it goes through and it breaks it up into like the early pre-NASA era, the Mercury program, the Gemini program, the Apollo program. There are bullet points you can see for each of these that break it down. And then we also have it do a cast of characters.
Whoa.
So it pulls out all the people who are mentioned, who are important, gives them a brief description. I mean, it's just like, it's so useful to understand what's in the material. So that's a start. Now, I pre-wrote, this is, the point here is that these transcripts are not at all focused on the Apollo 1 fire. So it's not a needle in a haystack, but it's like, there's a giant haystack of NASA related information in this notebook. And then there's, something, I don't know, like something the size of a shoe, not a needle, about the Apollo 1 fire, but it's spread out throughout all the documents. And so what I'm trying to do in putting together ideas for this documentary is figure out what's there that's relevant to this particular topic. And so I pre-wrote this prompt, and again, I'm trying to give it a little bit of context about the kinds of things I'm interested in. So I'm the author and TV creator, Stephen Johnson. I'm interested in making a TV documentary about the Apollo 1 fire in the multidisciplinary style of my books and shows like The Ghost Map and How We Got to Now, with a focus on surprising scientific explanations and compelling narratives. Give me a reader's guide to the most important sections of these interviews that I should read in getting started with this project. And I think it's still in the chat, actually, if I bring it up. Yeah. So this is the reader's guide that it created. And it just goes through interview by interview and pulls out the most relevant sections. And so it talks about the Kraft interview and explains who he is. And then he talks about the Apollo 1 fire as a turning point in the lunar program. And then it moves on to this Yardley guy and then Frank Borman. And so let's say I'm interested in the Borman quote. So I think it's this one. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. So I click on that. So there's a citation next to this quote, and I can click on that citation. It takes me straight to this passage. And the passage is talking about the trouble they were having the spacecraft before the fire. And so let's say I'm thinking, this is an interesting quote. I'm working on the documentary. I like that. And so I can just select this quote, and then I can say, add to note. And so it'll take that quote and just add it right there to my noteboard. So I've got this saved response from this interview. So then I can kind of go through, I can go back to the chat, and I can see if there's, okay, here's a quote from Neil Armstrong. And he's talking about, let's see, I can flip through these ones. I think the last one's probably the best. Yeah. Okay, so he's talking about the Apollo 1 fire. Some very traumatic times. I suppose you're much more likely to accept the loss of a friend in flight, but it really hurt to lose them in a ground test. So I'm taking that quote. That's doubly traumatic. So I could also save that. I can add to another note. So I'm kind of starting to collect ideas here that could be useful. And then I can ask anything else. Do you want anything you want to?
I have a lot of questions. I'm full of questions. So I guess one of the things that strikes me a lot about your books is you find like a pivotal moment where everything sort of like changed. And then you sort of trace how different technological innovations or different ideas like led to that moment and created it. And I'm wondering if there's a way for us to find some of those in here in ways that like we might not know already. So it's like, what are the sort of key technical ideas or key underlying innovations that, or lack of innovations that led to one of the pivotal moments in this narrative? I don't know how you would frame that exactly, but that's sort of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, so let me show you one little kind of low-tech NotebookLM hack that I often have a written note with prompts, because sometimes you're reusing your prompts, right? So inside the notebook, I'll have just a prompt note. And so, for instance, like I actually want to continue this idea of, I'm interested in the Apollo 1 fire. I don't want to have to rewrite that. So, we can just take that and then create a new prompt with that kind of introduction, and then say, I want to find a scientific idea scientific or technological idea that is central to the Apollo 1 fire that I could develop into a major set piece for this project. What would you recommend based on these? You don't really have to say based on these sources, but I sometimes like to do that.
Well, can we add a little bit more like?
Yep.
Ideally, the idea is like seemingly unrelated and surprising, but in hindsight, inevitably led to the fire.
It's tricky again because it has this. It's limited to the sources. This is but let's try it. Like the.
But you modify it in a way that you think will work best.
Yeah. Ideally, the scientific concept will be surprising and involve an unusual connection that the viewer might not have originally thought of. Okay, so then I'm just going to copy and paste that. So we have it. We could reuse it too. And let us see what it comes up with. It came back with a note called pure oxygen environments. And it says the use of a pure oxygen environment in the Apollo command module, while seemingly counterintuitive, played a significant role in the Apollo fire. The unusual choice stemmed from a desire for simplicity and weight reduction in the early spacecraft designs. This is what made it so flammable. And so here's the crazy thing, Dan. When I was thinking about this a little while ago, just kind of as an early idea, independent. I mean, I was kind of researching with Notebook, but I saw this stuff about pure oxygen, and Notebook doesn't know this, so this is just fortuitous on some level. But I wrote a book called The Invention of Air that was about the discovery of oxygen. Joseph Priestley, the 18th century chemist who kind of isolated and kind of didn't quite name, but first identified oxygen. And I thought, maybe there's kind of a version of the Apollo 1 story that connects to that history of oxygen that I've already written about, and that could somehow like be set up here. So like the fact that it like pulled that out. Now, I suppose maybe there's some training data that it knows that I've written about oxygen. I mean,
now we're getting exciting because we can take this and go back to your Readwise notes and try to pull some sources, right? Do you have oxygen?
Yeah, I could. Yeah. Let's see. So that would be interesting. I can't remember what's in there from that book because that was a long time ago, but it probably has some stuff in there. Let's try it. We'll go back over to that other notebook and we'll say, I'm writing about the use of a pure oxygen environment that caused the Apollo 1 fire. What sources in these, what quotes in these sources could be relevant to the use of oxygen and its history? Explain how I could use those ideas.
Should we ask it to be surprising, or do you think we should just do straight up first?
Let's not overtax it, Dan. It's a very sensitive model.
I'm not going easy on it. It can handle it.
Yeah, and this does raise an interesting question. Like, I have to jump to the other notebook to do this, and certainly there's this idea that perhaps you would want to have. Okay, let's start it right away. So it goes straight to Joseph Priestley, who I just mentioned, and Scheele, who also discovered oxygen independently. That's really cool. It brought up Picard. Yeah, this is great. This is another idea I actually had never wrote about. I think we're building something good here, Dan.
I love this.
Are you going to want Are you going to want a piece of this project, or
I'll take 10%, you know.
So this guy Picard, I wrote about this because I wrote about the discovery of the ozone layer, because I wrote about the guy who invented the freon CFCs that caused a hole in the ozone layer. And so there's this explorer, August Picard, who went up to the kind of stratosphere for the first time. And so like this product just blows me away so many times. So look at what it says here. So it reminds me of this story, which I thought was fascinating, but have never used. And it briefly describes it. I've got a link back to the original citation so I can go and read more about it. But this is what Notebook says. This source provides an example of an early enclosed environment that relied on a pure oxygen supply, similar to the Apollo 1 spacecraft, and notes the importance of respiration in such an environment.
Oh my God.
And it gives this quote: as the professor remarked, when you face the possibility of shutting two men up in an airtight space of such small dimensions, you must study very carefully the problem of their respiration.
That's so cool. That's the opening to the book or the documentary or whatever. That's amazing. That's so great. Cool.
I'm actually going to just go and copy that into the other notebook. I am shifting tabs here, but we gotta add that. So I'll close the chat briefly. And so here I'm just like creating a new note that it's like a written note, so I can paste that in there. Okay. Do you have another one?
Well, so now we've got this sort of August Picard idea. And I'm curious if there are any other like parallels between the two stories. So we've got the like pure, the oxygen and the sort of sealed environment. Do you think we could like search through, given this as context, this note that you just put in there, do you think we could search through the sources to see if there are other parallels?
In other parallels to August Picard in the in the NASA transcripts. Yeah. So this is the thing that's actually annoying to me about NotebookLM right now, which is the contents of your notes and the contents of your sources are kind of distinct. So I can, this is, a key feature that people actually, most notebook users, I think probably don't fully understand. But if I select all my notes, I'm now effectively talking, I focus the model. You see down at the bottom, it says 6 notes. I'm now focusing the model on the notes and not on my sources. Yeah. And so I can do things. I can summarize, I can suggest related ideas. That's what I could do. Actually, this will work. But what we really want to be able to do, we just haven't built it yet, is have the option of talking to all of your notes and all of your sources at the same time. It doesn't quite work that way, but there is a hack that will work actually. So what we're going to do is,
couldn't we just paste the note into the prompt?
Yes, we could, but I have an even better version.
Okay, great.
We have a dedicated prompt that we've built called Suggest Related Ideas. And so I've selected the note about Auguste Picard, right? Or Auguste, I don't know how to pronounce it. And now based on that note, I'm going to click on Suggest Related Ideas. And basically what it is saying is, take this note and find things in my sources that are related to this note. And, eventually you can imagine where this is going. You could be writing a note and be in the middle of a paragraph, and you're just like, okay, I just wrote this paragraph. Tell me other things that are like that. And it's just an extension of your memory. Like that's obviously where we're headed. But right now you have to kind of select the note. Okay, so here we go. We suggest related ideas. Actually, I haven't even tried this one. I wonder if it comes in with citations. This is kind of an older feature that I wonder if we've updated for citations. I'm learning about the product as we use it here.
We're doing it live, folks.
Yeah. This is the beauty of launch day. Okay, yeah, it did. I'm sure this is going to be a great answer, but it didn't have citations because of that. I got a note to the team here. Okay, so it says, the original passage focuses on his innovative use of a sealed gondola. It makes a connection to the perils of a pure oxygen environment, which is great, but it actually quotes from Gene Kranz. So it gives you a quote from Gene Kranz, a famous flight director. We had become very complacent about working in a pure oxygen environment. We all knew this was dangerous. So that's going to be helpful. Then it talks about human factors in spacecraft design, and says that Jonathan Yardley's oral history, and he gives a quote. And then it says, this quote, while seemingly humorous, reveals the initial crude understanding of the challenges of human spaceflight. Yardley also discusses the challenges of atmospheric control, which is really important for Picard's flight. And he highlights an incident where a test engineer passed out due to unexpected nitrogen buildup. And then he talks about the notebook brings up the importance of redundancy as another idea. And it quotes Gene Lunny talking about redundancy, which was, really important in the Apollo fire, that they didn't have enough redundancy built into the system. So you see what it's doing here is that it's basically been told, the prompt is basically saying, find 3 related ideas, and, explain what they are and explain how they connect to the original thing you've given it. And so this is like that. It was such a high level form of intelligence of making those conceptual leaps. And again, it gets back to what we were talking about at the beginning. This is a fusion of so many different separate intelligences coming together here. So you have the original sources, whoever wrote about, Picard that I quoted from, that is an author somewhere who's come up with this idea or written about this person, or biographer. There's Stephen, who has curated these quotes and put together this idea of the NASA project and, gathered all these transcripts. They're the individual astronauts or flight directors who are talking and their expertise, whatever. And then in the middle of it all, there's, Gemini Pro and NotebookLM synthesizing all these things and making these connections possible. So it's I used to talk about it like a duet between, human and computer, but this is like a full chorus, right? It's so extraordinary. So let's say we're going to pin. So let me show you this. I haven't showed this before. This is a key part of it. So this is where you save interesting responses. You just pin them. And so that becomes part of your note board here.
Got it.
And so we've got some stuff about Picard. We've got some quotes from Borman and Neil Armstrong. So we've got the beginnings of, maybe a way of framing a documentary about this. So we're going to select these specific notes that we've curated. And, you could imagine this would be, a much larger collection, but this gives you a sense of how the kind of the new workflow that's possible. And this is the kind of thing I really think that 1% of NotebookLM users actually understand that you can do this. But so once I've selected these notes, not only can I summarize or suggest related ideas or create study guides or create an outline based on those specific notes, I can do whatever I want with them by typing into the chat. And so what I'm going to do is say, I'm going to take that original quote about the thing I'm interested in making. So I'm interested in making this documentary. I'm Stephen Johnson, and I'm going to add, based on these notes, suggest an opening script for a documentary episode about Apollo 1 and the prehistory of space flight. Just adding that for the Picard. I will try, in a little extra twist here, suggest images from these sources that could be relevant. So let's see what it does. So now, actually, it's not going to work because it's not going to be able to do the images because it's focused on the notes right now. But we'll see what it does. But it should be able to generate a pretty interesting script. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so opening script. Visual. Open on black and white footage of Picard's high altitude balloon gondola from the 1930s. It looks surprisingly modern. Narrator. In the 1930s, Swiss physicist Auguste Picard looked to the skies and to the fantastical novels of Jules Verne to imagine a new way to explore the world. And then we cut forward to, it says, visual, black and white still photo of the Apollo 1 crew. In January of 1967, tragedy struck on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. And look at the transition it does between these two. Narrator says, decades later, a new generation of explorers would borrow from Picard's vision, sealing themselves into metal capsules, breathing pure oxygen as they slipped the bonds of Earth. But the dream of space travel would soon be met by a devastating truth.
That's so good. I love this whole journey of Apollo on fire, Picard, and then we get a little script. It's a beautiful idea and it's a beautiful parallel. It's so cool.
Yeah. This will be coming out in 2 years, folks. I hope you all, Dan Schipper, Stephen Johnson production. You heard it. Dan only gets 10% though. That's what he said.
You're writing the rest of it. So, I'm just the idea guy. Um, yeah, this is wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time to show us this this product, taking the time to go on this intellectual journey with me. I would love to have you back anytime. For people who are looking to read your book, your latest book, or to find you on Twitter or anywhere else on the internet, how can they find you, and tell us about your latest book? Where can they find that?
Yeah, the new book is called The Infernal Machine: The True Story of Dynamite Terror and the Rise of the Modern Detective. So it is very much in the spirit of what you've just seen being created here, weaving together a bunch of different stories about the history of science and technology, but also political violence, and it's kind of a thriller in a strange way in the second half of it. It's really fun, just in bookstores now. And I'm Stephen B. Johnson on Twitter, and I write the newsletter Adjacent Possible on Substack, where a lot of information about NotebookLM will be there. And of course, NotebookLM is notebooklm.google.com, and now available in over 200 countries around the world as of today. So please do check it out.
Incredible. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Dan.
Absolutely positively have to smash that like button and subscribe to AI and I. Why? Because this show is the epitome of awesomeness. It's like finding a treasure chest in your backyard, but instead of gold, it's filled with pure, unadulterated knowledge bombs about ChatGPT. Every episode is a roller coaster of emotions, insights, and laughter that will leave you on the edge of your seat, craving for more. It's not just a show. It's a journey into the future with Dan Shipper as the captain of the spaceship. So do yourself a favor, hit like, smash subscribe, and strap in for the ride of your life. And now, without any further ado, let me just say, Dan, I'm absolutely, hopelessly in love with you.